Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to our first Acquidance webinar. We have already around 30 participants in the room. Since we only have 1 hour for the webinar, I think we will not wait much longer. But the webinar will be recorded, so if you missed the first minutes, you're happy to watch it later on. So my name is Nina Grasnick. I'm a research associate here at the Thünen Institute in Germany, and I'm the project coordinator of the Acquidance project. And today we have our first webinar, which is on GHG emissions in dairy production systems. And we will hear 3 very exciting presentations from Cecile de Klein, Andy Miller, and Anna Russell. And before we start the webinar, I have a few technical announcements. So this webinar is being recorded and the video will be made available for future viewings via the GRA website and the Acquidance website. And we will have 3 presentations today with the Q&A sessions following this presentation. And you will be able to submit your questions as we go via the Q&A function. So I hope you can all see this button down at your screen, and we will get through as many questions as we can. And for the ones that we will not be able to answer live, we will make sure that we will provide some written answers to you after the webinar. And now, before we start, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the Acquidance project. So the Acquidance project is a bilateral cooperation project between Germany and New Zealand, and it started in June 2024, and it will last until December 2026. And the project goal is to intensify the mutual exchange of experiences and cooperation between New Zealand and Germany and third-party countries to develop solutions for the global climate impact of agricultural production systems and on agricultural production systems. And we work in 3 pillars. So the first one is strengthening the scientific exchange between the 2 countries and research institutions. And this is also one of the reasons why we are having this webinar today. In the second pillar, we aim to establish a science policy dialogue on priority subtopics. And in the third pillar, we foster exchange with third-party countries, particularly in the global south. With this, I think I would like to hand over already to our first presenter today, Cecile de Klein. Cecile is a principal scientist with the research group of the New Zealand Bioeconomy Science Institute and has over 30 years research experience in nitrogen cycling and greenhouse gas emissions from grazed livestock systems. And she leads the New Zealand contribution to the so-called Clean Farms project, a Horizons 2020 program on developing carbon neutral farming systems. And Cecile also works closely with the policymakers and the agricultural sector to help develop national as well as on-farm GHG accounting models. So yeah, I'm very excited to hear your presentation, Cecile, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nina. Guten Morgen, good evening, and kia ora katoa. Great to see you all and joining this webinar. And thanks for the introduction again, Nina. And I'll be indeed talking a little bit about this project that we've been doing under the Clean Farms project. And would like to acknowledge my co-authors from BSI Ag Research and also Dairy NZ. For those of you who don't really know a lot about New Zealand dairy systems, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of an overview and tell you a bit about the characteristics. So in New Zealand, we very much have pastoral systems, commonly year-round grazing. So we have not as much housing as you probably might be used to in Germany or in Europe. That means we do have more limited inputs of imported feeds, and also much fewer issues, if you like, with manure management of all that manure that's collected during housing. Also, when you are grazing pastures year round, you there is an issue with in cooler areas where the grass is not able to grow enough to provide enough dry matter during those periods, the cows are grazed on winter crops. And you can see a photo in the middle there, and there's typically kale or fodder beet or sweet crops. And finally, our pastures are very much clover-based pastures, so clover provides quite a significant amount of nitrogen input into our systems. This is just a slide showing the Clean Farms project overview. It's the Horizon 2020 project that is run from Europe with lots of European countries and lots of production systems involved, all aiming to develop climate neutral or net carbon zero systems. And New Zealand was able to join or align with that Horizon 2020 program through funding from our government. And we use one of our Southern Dairy Hub research farms as the Clean Farms case study. So the New Zealand participation in Clean Farms has multiple aspects, and I'm reporting on two of them today. Firstly, I will presenting some results on assessing the greenhouse gas emissions from those 4 research farmlets that are run at the Southern Dairy Hub. And secondly, on top of that, we conducted additional systems modeling to include more options into the systems to see how far can those systems be moved towards net carbon zero. The 4 farmlets at the Southern Dairy Hub that we used as our case study farm, they are really looking at a combination of intensity versus wintering system. So in the intensity, there were two types that were tested. Standard intensity, which is a more obviously, as the name says, the commonly used intensity of the system, and a lower intensity system. You can see here there is a difference in nitrogen fertilizer inputs. There is a reduction in cow numbers, and the per animal production was also different. So on the whole, the milk production of the 2 systems was similar, but it was achieved in a different way. That was then combined, all 2 of them were combined with 2 of the wintering systems, either the commonly used crop-based system, which in this case is fodder beet, where the cows were in winter grazed outdoors on the fodder beet, or it was combined with a grass silage-based system where the cows were either grazed indoors on the standard intensity system on grass silage, or outdoors in the lower intensity system on pasture-based system. And to assess the on-farm greenhouse gas emissions from these 4 systems, we used the New Zealand Farm Systems Model FarmX. And that includes the emissions that we calculated included the following sources, as you can see: methane from enteric emissions and manure emissions, nitrous oxide from urine and dung, so that was deposited during grazing, and some from the manure that was collected during milking, and also emissions from fertilizer. And those emissions also include carbon dioxide emissions that are emitted following the application of urea fertilization. So urea is the most commonly used fertilizer in New Zealand, and when it is applied to the soil, it emits CO2, and that was included in the calculations as well. Just to show a little bit about the FarmX model, I'm showing the results first, sorry. So these are the modeled on-farm greenhouse gas emissions. So the green bars are the total emissions that we calculated for the 4 systems on the x-axis. And the blue bars is the same on-farm emissions but expressed per unit of milk solid. So we call them intensity, but it's not the carbon footprint. It is the on-farm emissions per unit of milk solids produced. And as you can see, if you compare the first 2 green bars, you can see that intensity had a significant reduction, about 20% reduction in greenhouse gas and total greenhouse gas emissions, and about 6% reduction in greenhouse gas intensity. And that was really achieved by the higher per cow performance, the lower stocking rate, and the lower nitrogen fertilizer use in those lower intensity systems. And that was both for crop wintering or for grass wintering. The wintering system did not really have an effect on total greenhouse gas emissions. So the first and the third green bar are very much the same, and the second and the fourth are the same. So the wintering system didn't really affect total emissions, but there was a slight reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in greenhouse gas intensity under the crop wintering system. So as I said, these results are calculated using FarmX, which is a New Zealand-based model that you in Germany are probably not familiar with. But the tool you might be familiar with is the Cool Farm tool. And the Cool Farm tool is also a farm systems tool that is used as the common tool within the Clean Farm project. So we did estimate our greenhouse gas emissions both using the Cool Farm tool and FarmX. And on the left, you see the total farmland emissions, and there you see some variation. But that's also because the two tools do use different sources. So the Clean Farm tool includes some embedded emissions as well of the production of fertilizer and also the fuel use on farm. So what we did was looking at just picking out the one that we know is more commonly comparable, which is the enteric methane emissions per farmlet. And there you can see the results are actually quite comparable. So that gives us some level of confidence that those two tools are actually quite compatible in comparing their greenhouse gas emissions. So what we then did is using again this FarmX tool to add in additional modeling into those farmlet systems. And how far, the key question we asked was how far towards carbon zero can we get with currently available mitigations in New Zealand? So we modeled those mitigations either singularly into the systems or in various combinations. And it's a short overview of the mitigations. So we had a further increases in per cow performance and using better genetics of the animals, adjusting stocking numbers or keeping them the same. We looked at lower greenhouse gas footprint feed. We took out all nitrogen fertilizer of the systems and adjusted the systems to see how that would work. Plus, we looked at within farm land use change, so insetting of trees or growing cash crops on those areas of farm where you, when you had a lower stock numbers and you had freed up some land, could put that in. And that was about 1 to 4% of the farm we could look for changes in land use. And these are the results. Summary of the results. With the currently available options, we could reduce on-farm emissions by up to 30%, particularly for the standard intensity systems. But you need to remember that the lower intensity systems already had a lower footprint, so there was less opportunity to further reduce them. And the order in which the emissions were greatly reduced was and fertilizer inputs had the greatest impact on reducing emissions. Then the per cow performance and better genetics. Then we looked at insetting or trees or crops, and then the lower greenhouse gas footprint feed that had very little effect on total greenhouse gas emissions from these farmlets. We also had the opportunity to look at actually the nitrate leaching reduction. So versus the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there was actually quite a good co-benefit of the two environmental impacts. We also looked at operating profit, and there was a negative relationship, if you like, with reduction in greenhouse gas emissions versus the increase in profit. So it was really important to show you that even with a reduction in about 10% of greenhouse gas reduction, farmers could still have an increase in their current profit. All farmers were still profitable, even at the higher end of greenhouse gas reduction, but they were simply not as profitable. And I'll just show you a little bit about that, how that looks for the standard intensity crop wintering systems. So again, x-axis the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions relative to the baseline farm and the operating profit and the y-axis. And you can see there's still a positive operating profit in New Zealand dollars per hectare. And this is for when incorporating those green and those mitigations. But then what we also did was looking, well, what if New Zealand has been talking about bringing in a pricing mechanism for farmers that they have to start paying for their greenhouse gas emissions. So we looked at what would happen if that was the case, and we made some assumptions about what that would cost. We assumed here in New Zealand dollars of $80 per ton of CO2 equivalent. And if you then look at the results, it actually suggests that you actually gain more operating by mitigating, because the baseline also drops, of course, from what the original baseline was if you have to start paying for greenhouse gas emissions. So it does depend on how we're going forward in these policy settings. So final slide for me is really to give some key messages. The work that we did, the modeling really showed that with current options, we had up to 30% reduction in on-farm greenhouse gas emissions, and the no-N fertilizer was by far the best scenario, and especially when we combine this with better genetics and offsetting or insetting the trees. Definitely was a trade-off between greenhouse gas reduction and profitability, but again, the farms were all still profitable. But there was a positive co-benefit with greenhouse gas and nitrate leaching losses. Final point I wanted to make, a couple of final points, is that really we have to keep in mind that our project looked at total on-farm emissions, because that's what the New Zealand government is looking for in terms of targets, but also in terms of pricing farmers, which is different to a carbon footprint of milk. And Andy, in the next talk, will talk about that a little bit more. And it's confusing for farmers sometimes because those two metrics are not the same, and they include and exclude different things. So we need, and the results of modeling are also not necessarily the same outcomes. So key message really is that focusing on the efficiency of milk production is really what we give farmers now to see if they can achieve both a reduction on farm emissions and milk carbon footprint milk targets. And I'll finish with some acknowledgements of our funders, the Dairy Hub, and my colleagues who supported all this work. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Yeah, thank you, Cecile, for this very interesting overview of your results from the Clean Farms project, and also for pointing out the importance to look also at the economics. And I think this is also interesting now when we move now from more the researcher perspective to the private sector with our next presenter, Andy Miller, who's also based in New Zealand. Andy is the General Manager of On-Farm Excellence in Environment for Fonterra. His team is responsible for the strategy, programs, tools, and services delivered to farmers supporting environmental improvements, particularly focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and freshwater quality. And this includes on-farm change initiatives, farm planning, and support for farmers to identify and take advantage of opportunities to improve water quality and emissions, environmental accounting, and advocacy on policy and regulation. And prior to joining Fonterra, Andy had a broad background in the dairy industry, including operations management of a multi-farm dairy operation, veterinary, pharmaceutical, technical, and business management, and in practice as a dairy vet. So yeah, I think I'm very excited to now hear Andy's presentation. And as Joe mentioned in the chat, please feel free to include your questions to the Q&A box so that we will be able to put these questions to the presenters after the third presentation. And with this, I open the floor to Andy.
First challenge over, got the mute button off. Thank you very much, Nina, and thank you for the invite to come and talk to you tonight or this morning, depending on where you're from. I am going to talk today around yes, some of the things we're doing to support our emissions reduction pathway, working with farmers to achieve our target, the SBTI target that we set of 30% reduction of on-farm emissions per tonne of fat and protein-corrected milk, with a target of 2030 from our 2018 baseline. When we look at the intent to hit this target, we sort of see this coming from 4 key areas. The first is sort of reduction of historical land use change as we move further away from deforestation events, the improvement of the amount of and capture of more of the carbon removals that are existing on farms, investment and deployment of novel technology, particularly in the reducing enteric methane and nitrous oxide there, and so broadly, I guess we might call a hogwart solution. But the focus that we're going to talk about today is really, when I say it's the first step, it's the first thing that we look at before really chasing anything else to reduce emissions, because it's a real win-win, and that is really focusing on the core efficiencies of farming, making sure we're using the inputs that we have for farm as efficiently as possible. And broadly, we see our focus on efficiency, unsurprisingly, in 2 key areas as we track the efficient production system through from taking natural capital and nutrient inputs and turning that into feed, and then turning feed into milk with cows as the intermediaries. So that is, and along the way, we focus on improving cow quality and efficiency, so more productive cows in herds, and looking at really honing our farm systems and feed supply, ensuring we've got a system set up to support a high-performing cow. Each of these pathways have critical enablers, and so from cow quality, the focus for us around reproductive performance, animal genetic improvement, reduced wastage through animal health issues, and a real focus on the animal level efficiency within system to optimize productivity per kilo of live weight. For the feed supply, the focus is really homegrown feed, so optimizing the performance of our farms to ensure that we're getting as much from the farms harvested per hectare as we can, with a careful and considered balance around imported feed. So in short, we're aiming for healthy cows, better bred, and better fed with less inputs, aren't we all? So in terms of the farmer support that we supply, on the left are some sort of incentives that we have in place for farmers, and I'll touch on that later on in the presentation. But we have what we call the cooperative difference, which is an incentive for, and I sort of probably should say a little bit more about Fonterra. So we have just over 8,000 suppliers in New Zealand, and we're about 80% of the market. We cover the whole country, and our farmers are all shareholders in the cooperative. So in terms of that farmer support or signals that we send, we call that the cooperative difference. That is an incentive scheme around signaling what we see as best practice. On top of that, we have customer funded initiatives which pay some incentives based on particularly emissions performance, and subsidize some of the solutions to help make progress. On the other side, we have what we call our on-farm efficiency service, so one-to-one and group sessions with farmers, and incorporating other industry partners to talk about data-led conversations around looking for opportunities and helping farmers to get there. We have a bunch of online and paper-based resources that will help with those discussions, and then we're partnering with industry in terms of helping with delivery as the pass-through, people pass-through partners, so we can connect farmers to take the next steps to industry partners, and in terms of research and development across the industry. One of the key collaborations that we've been doing with our industry partners over the last 18 months or so has been really focusing on the relationship between emissions and profitability. And this is between us, Dairy NZ, the levy-funded industry good and research body, the Livestock Improvement Corporation, who are an animal improvement and genetics company, and looking at the combined data sets of all these organisations to combine data for around about 8,000 farms across the country, to give a really powerful data set to create a deeper understanding of relationships between the physical and financial outputs on a farm. I'm not going to go into too much of the detail of this. There are some, if you're interested in this, there are some really good resources for this on the Dairy NZ website. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that if you're interested. But the high level things, one of the key drivers for this was farmers saying, you're asking me to improve my performance in terms of emissions intensity. What's that going to do to my profitability? Because that's the bottom line, that's how I feed my family, etc., etc. So we had to answer that question: is there a trade-off between improving our emissions intensity and profitability? And the answer was maybe. Not really, actually. It was the answer was there was no real trade-off, but it wasn't so simple. We found that high profit can be generated in systems with low or high emissions. So there were some caveats to that. We found that the key to the to combining high profit and low emissions is that real focus on good production per kilo of live weight and low footprint feed and inputs. So low footprint feed is maximizing homegrown feed, efficient use of nitrogen fertilizer, and inputting the supplement that's used with low embedded emissions. And what the other question that we had is, are all the high profit, low emissions farms clustered in better producing areas? Are some farmers just lucky where they are? And so we did quite a lot of geospatial analysis and found that those high profit farms with low emissions were found all across every region, and all farms have opportunities to lower emissions if done in the right way without compromising other inputs. And we did see other, similar to Cecile's talk, we did see other beneficial effects. So the efficiency in the systems that was driving, helping profitability and lowering emissions also had other effects. So we did see a higher percentage of homegrown feed eaten, or other associations, I should say. We did see that there was less supplements fed on those farms, so a higher ratio of homegrown feed to supplements, generally less animals or less stocking rate, so less animals per hectare, but with a higher production per cow. And then there was also lower or better conversion of purchased nitrogen, so imported nitrogen and feed and fertilizer, through to product on those farms. So all that helps us answer the questions when talking to farmers. So we have a team of around 40 what we call sustainable dairying advisors, who advise farmers and do farm environment plans around water quality and on-farm efficiency driving lowering of greenhouse gases. And so we launched a focused one-on-one efficiency services, and as I say, we also do group meetings with these advisors and where the team work with farmers to identify the opportunities that they, in the areas that they might be looking at to improve efficiency. We have a number of tools and resources to support that. The first is what we call our Farm Insights report. So all of our farmers fill out what we call our farm dairy records. So input and production records across the farm. And we use that for several reasons, but one of them is that the output of the Insights report, which really supports that conversation, helping to find opportunities. It on a number of metrics shows how farmers compare, benchmarking them against relevant cohorts. And they can see how things have changed over time and assess strategy and look at opportunities. We do have an electronic version of this, which is updated automatically as the farmer enters or alters data that they put in. We have what we call our emissions scenario calculator, which allows farmers looking at macro changes in their system to see what effect that would have on their emissions footprint. And then we have a simple version of that, and then that farmers can access online, and a more detailed version that our team uses with farmers. And then we have our on-farm efficiency hub, linking farmers to more details, more insights, more information and connections through to industry partners, so they can get more support. Within the Farm Insights report, sorry, these will be a bit small to read, but we have some, really a bunch of areas where we focus on efficiency. The first is optimization of nutrients. That looks at what we call our purchased nitrogen surplus, so the balance of nitrogen and brought into the farm and nitrogen that goes out. We focus on that homegrown feed production relative to a comparable cohort. So we look at the 100 closest farms. So is what I generated for all farmers in the co-op. And then we rank that considering the amount of fertilizer inputs. So we've got things normalized so you can have a fair comparison. We look at feed efficiency. So firstly, the sources of feed with comparable production level farms. And then we look at the efficiency of conversion to energy to milk as a relative to maintenance, and related to that, the production as a percentage of live weight. We then look at animal efficiency, so how the farms compare in reproductive efficiency. So two main things that we look at there in the New Zealand seasonal system, where we mate once per year and have a mating period and a calving period rather than calving all year round. So one of the key drivers of reproductive efficiency is how many animals we get in calf in the first 6 weeks. And then secondly, how many animals are not in calf at the end of the mating period. And we look at that relative to how long mating went on for. So we can compare.
And you have
across.
So you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, great. And we also look at mastitis and lameness there. The other part that we have is we do report back on carbon footprint. So that has evolved over time from a pretty simple inventory-based model that just looked at biological emissions through to more detailed LCA model broken down by gas type and source. And then finally, just to reinforce this, we have what we call the cooperative difference, which provides reward or incentive for best practice across a broad level of metrics, and then specifically for emissions intensity and milk quality. And then, as I say, we have funded by customers further reward for the best performing farms in in emissions intensity, and then finally support of on-farm solutions that will improve efficiency and reduce emissions across farmers' farms for anyone that attains any level of our incentive scheme. So that brings us to the end of that discussion. Hopefully that's sort of made it in those 2 minutes.
Yeah, perfectly on time. Thank you, Andy, for this very interesting insights from the more like private sector perspective. And with this, we hand over to our last but not least presenter, Anna Raschel. And yeah, we still see, yeah, okay. So we go now to Germany, and we go back more to the scientific perspective again. But I think, Anna, you're also closely working together with the private sector, and we will learn more about this in your presentation. So Anna completed a bachelor's degree in agribusiness marketing and management at the University of Applied Science Weinstefan Triesdorf here in Germany. And for her master's degree, she attended the University of Kassel and studied organic agricultural sciences. And at the Thünen Institute here in Germany of Farm Economics, she works on the project QM Dairy Sustainability Tool, where she will also provide us more insights now in her presentation. Anna, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me today. And so, I want to talk to you about the sustainability of German dairy production and thereof measuring overall sustainability and addressing climate change. So, as Nina told, I'm working in the dairy sustainability tool, and that's dealing with overall sustainability and not only with climate. So I try to show you what's our way with the topic of climate. So at the beginning, I want to raise a guiding question for my presentation. So the question is, what's more important, the calculation of the CO2 footprint or the focus on management factors? So maybe you think that's an unnecessary question, but in past we were confronted with this question and have had to make decisions about it. So I want to show you in my presentation how we deal with this question. And maybe you can also show your thoughts in the Q&A. So the two topics I want to give you insights today is the scientific approach with the dairy sustainability tool and also some insights into industry actions. So the scientific approach, let me first explain you what the dairy sustainability tool is. The tool is a foundational tool for sustainability assessment on dairy farms. So it covers 4 sustainability areas. As you might know, the 3 pillars of sustainability: social, economic, and environmental sustainability, and also animal welfare. And the special thing is that it got its own pillar. So it's a holistic view on sustainability, and we have in total 68 sustainability criteria. And in the picture, you can see in the numbers the share or where the criteria are distributed to the areas. The development of the tool began already in 2012, so it was step by step developed in, I would say, a scientific way. So there was lots of literature research and also several multi-stakeholder workshops. So what's the goal of the tool? One goal is to develop a foundation of sustainability. So at this time, it was necessary to show which criteria have to be considered to be able to make statements about sustainability on farms. Also to show the status quo of sustainability. So we are collecting a lot of data to show what's the current state. And in order to that, we want to show fields of actions and options for improvements, and also push a transition process. So how is the tool working? in the tool, the dairy companies and also their farmers take part. So the dairy companies have to encourage their farmers to take part in the tool and fill in the questionnaire. After that, data checks and analysis are carried out at the Thünen Institute, and then we have two main outcomes. One is the report for the dairy companies. So there the dairy companies can see the results for the whole sample and also so for all the dairy farmers who took part. And then the second main output is the benchmark report for every farmer. So every participating farmer gets an individual results report, and they can see also or can make a comparison to the whole sample. And yeah, these reports should contribute to the analysis of strengths and weaknesses, to set targets, and also to implement measures. So you have noticed I haven't talked about climate, so I will change this now. And in the 4 dimensions of the tool I showed you, climate is not mentioned extra. But we are dealing with climate and with climate topics. So I tried to depict you in the 2 dots how we are dealing with the topic. So the bigger dot is the focus on the management factors. So that's also the main focus of the tool. So the management factors which are impacting climate. Due to sector demand, we recently also included the CO2 footprint in the smaller dot because it was put in earlier this year, and the years before we didn't calculate the footprint. So why we decided to do this way? There are several reasons. One reason is that the main focus of the tool is to show specific fields of actions and improvements to the farmers. So there was the decision that the consideration of management factors is therefore more useful than just one figure. And also the development began more than 10 years ago. So at this time, the demand for a footprint was not that massive than compared to now. So at this time, there was a development of a different working system initiated. So I also told you it is a foundational tool, and therefore the data collection is kind of different than it's needed for the calculation of a footprint. So to calculate a really individual footprint for every farm, there are lots of more data needed than we have in this in our tool. And so currently we are getting by some standard values, so it's not that individual, the footprint. But I also want to mention that there is a lot of change at the moment in the tool, so I guess the calculation will not stay the same. So nevertheless, we have a lots of climate criteria which can be found over or almost every category in the tool. So let me show you some examples. We have in the economic part the average lifetime production. In the environmental part, we have the slurry storage, and we have in the animal welfare part the feed ration calculation. So as I told you, we are collecting a lot of data to show the status quo of the farms. I want to also give you a quick overview of all the climate criteria. And here in this bar chart, you can also see how the rating system of the tool is working. So the rating system is here in the green, excellent or good. Then in the blue is satisfactory, or in the red, unsatisfactory. We also have this white bar charts. That's our bonus criteria. There we say we can rate it as unsatisfactory when a farmer is not doing this. So here in this bar chart, you can see that there are criteria which are quite good. For example, regarding here grassland, but there are also criteria with need for improvement. So, and there I want to go into one example, because I think, and as Cecilia told, there is in New Zealand, there is less menu management than in Germany because of the stable-based system. I want to point out the slurry or the digestate applied with emission-reduced technologies, because I think it's quite different to New Zealand. When you look in the bar chart, you see that is the criteria is divided into unsatisfactory or and good. And so on the first side, there you can see that is need for improvement. But we have to also consider a little bit of background knowledge, especially in this criterion. The first thing is that recently high emission application techniques or so-called spreading technique was recently banned by the government. So I guess this figure will change because this data here you can see were also collected before this ban. The second thing is that the structure of the dairy farms in Germany is very heterogeneous. So we have the range of dairy cows per farm ranges from 1 cow to about up to 3,000 cows. So especially in the smaller farms, investing in emission-reduced application technique can be very hard. And also regarding to the ban, there are still exceptional rules planned regarding these very small farms. So I hope I could give you a little expression. So due to time, I can't speak about every criterion, but I want to just show you how this system is working. And I want to switch now to the industry actions and maybe also a short background to the German dairy sector in Germany, because so the milk or dairy manufacturing is very diverse. So there are about 100 dairy companies and they have different purchasing and selling strategies. There are national or international trading and they also have different customers. So therefore the requirements are also very different, and that results in different strategies concerning sustainability and climate. So, but what's clear is that the main focus at the moment is, of course, climate. And we have, I saw 2 pillars in the industry. That one pillar is the calculation of the CO2 footprint. So many dairy companies request the footprint from the farmers. And what I noticed, or what people from companies told me, that motivating farmers is to calculate the footprint. That entails a lot of work and is very time consuming. And recently there was also or there are different providers for calculators in Germany for the dairy companies. And recently there was a lot of work invested to bring them up to the same level, to have the same method behind the calculation. So the dairy companies can still use the different providers, but the method is the same and the footprints can now be also compared. The second pillar is to go beyond the footprint and take actions for reductions. And so I also want to give you there some examples what's currently happening, because many dairies try to reduce the emissions in the value chain, but there's also the thing that every dairy tries its own way, because it's also influenced by the request of the customers. So there are several examples. Some dairy companies try demonstration farms, so they support some farms where mitigation measures are tried out, and that's mostly accompanied by scientific monitoring. Then some other companies offer workshop programs to the farmers, some presentations to special topics or climate topics, or also some kind of peer-to-peer learning. What I also saw is that dairy companies are offering consulting services or enabling for the farmers, and there's also an effort to improve the offerings of consulting services, particularly for the climate topics. And last, there are incentive programs or supporting programs for mitigation measures, for example, payments or gifts. So let me come back to the question I raised. What's more important, the calculation of the footprint or the management factors? And so I would say in Germany, there was a lot of time invested in the calculation of the footprint, so the method, the system behind or around the calculation, and also how to get the farmers in. And I think that's a very important step, and it's very important to have a valid foundation. And what we see is now that it's the time to take the actions for reductions and maybe put the focus on the individual management factors. And I also think for the farmers, they need more than a single figure, and they need the translation into the special options for extras. So yeah, thank you for listening, and maybe you share your thoughts to this in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for your insights from Germany and for completing the presentation round today in our webinar. We also have a few questions in the chat, and I want to pick some of them. So the first one goes to Cecile from Claudia Heidecke. What do you think is the way forward to better compare carbon footprints with on-farm emissions? And is CO2 sequestration included? Cecile?
Yeah, thanks for the questions, and thanks for all the questions that were put in the Q&A. They were very good questions. Thanks, Claudia. It is a tricky one, and I think it is very much we need to be very clear when we're talking about these different metrics, what's included and what's excluded, and what we're trying to aim for. So what is the target? And the industry's target is possibly slightly different, and that might be the milk footprint is important from our overseas customers, and our whereas at a government level, we might want to reduce our total greenhouse gas emissions for New Zealand. So there are different targets we're trying to achieve, and you need to be very clear about it, what you want to achieve. But the key messaging coming out of what is a good mitigation is therefore also possibly also slightly different. And as long as we put it in the right context, I don't think it is necessarily about comparing the two metrics, but it's about putting them in the right context of what we want to achieve and how we do best do that. I hope that answers your question. And if CO2 is included to some extent, in our modeling, CO2 sequestration was definitely included by when you're using trees or cash crops. At the moment, we're not including CO2 soil carbon, but I'm not sure if that was your question.
Thank you, Cecile. And then a second question to you from an anonymous participant. How is the farmer's reaction on still profitable but less profitable? And will there be some refund to compensate the costs?
Yeah, well, I think Andy already answered that question, certainly in the first part when he said that farmers didn't really like that messaging about, you're asking me to reduce emissions, but I'm getting my profits going down and I need to feed my family. This is my livelihood, if you like. So I think the answer to that is possibly quite clear. Although, on the other hand, and now I'm talking more as as a society, we need to also recognize that someone needs to pay for the costs, if you like, and up until now, environmental cost of farming production has always been externalized. So it's always been the cost to society, and that is a question, that is a political question, and that is, as me, a scientist, can't really answer how we deal with that. But and compensation for the cost. I think there is talk about, well, options have been considered of compensating farmers that do mitigate, but I'm not sure where that is. I don't know, Andy, if you have a clearer picture on where it is at the moment.
Yeah, it's a tricky question, and there's another sort of one digging into that a bit further down around how farmers react to the incentives. I'll probably wrap up answers to a few of those together. I guess and we sort of see it as being difficult to get terribly far with absolute reductions if that has a dual effect of reducing profitability and reducing production, particularly if we are sort of really focused and building on a relatively low impact production system on, from a global comparison. So our focus with our farmers is really been on emissions intensity reduction as a mechanism to reduce absolute emissions. And while that's sort of probably perhaps a more difficult thing to achieve, in that you could just create absolute reduction by reducing production levels, it does create the win-wins for farmers, and that's kind of the key message that we go out with at this stage in terms of efficiency comes first. That's the first thing that we need to do to make sure that we are minimizing the impacts and the inputs that we require per unit of product, and then that aligns that productivity and profitability and sustainability targets there.
Thank you, Andy. And maybe I would also hand over a similar question to Anna, because you also mentioned in the last slides that there's incentive programs also from the German dairy industry to the farmers. So how is the reaction there? Do you have any insights from your project?
No, not really. I don't have insights. I know from one company they have some incentive program, and I think that's working quite well. So, but it's more on energy saving and how to support the farmers with the topic of energy. But I don't know more about how is this working.
Okay, thank you, Anna. And then there's another question for you in the chat from Emmanuel Berge-Gidai. Thank you for your nice presentation. How did you measure the social aspects of the sustainability of dairy production in Germany?
Yeah, thank you for this important question of the social part of the tool, because we think that's also a very important part and maybe also the basis of the whole thing. And yeah, that's not that easy to measure it. We are looking at the leader of the farm and also at the staff at the farm. And so the tool is a self-assessment. So we are asking questions like, how many holiday do you have, or how many days off do you have? And also, how is the safety on the farm? But it's, or what else? How are the working hours from the staff? Yeah, but it's self-assessment, so we don't ask for a proof of that, what they're sharing us.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to all the speakers and also to the participants for these great questions. I see there's more in the chat, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, we will make sure that we will answer them in written format after the webinar. We will also share the recording at the Aquidens website and other channels. And before I'm closing the webinar now, I also wanted to highlight a few upcoming activities of the Aquidens project. So if you liked the webinar today, you're more than welcome to meet me and the Aquidance team at the Tropentag conference, which is taking place in Bonn next week. It's an in-person workshop, so yeah, probably only interesting for people here around Germany. But we will also have more online workshops starting end of September, focusing on soil health, carbon sequestration, and sustainable land management. So feel free to sign up and follow our newsletter for these online workshops. And we will also have a GJA site event in Kenya in October. So if you are around in Kenya at that time, feel free to join us there as well. And so as I mentioned, feel free to visit our website, follow us on LinkedIn, or sign up to our newsletter to stay tuned. And I hope to see you at some point again, maybe online or in person at some of our events. And thanks again to this great webinar today and to all the presentations. And have a good day or good night wherever you stay in the world.